This review and analysis of Star Trek Picard Episode 10, Et in Arcadia Ego Part 2, and what a mouthful that is, contains full spoilers. The playlist for the rest of the series is in the description. Post recap, the first thing we see is a nice CGI shot of the artifact set in water, and a little man running along the edge of the land near it, who is of course Narek. The absolute neglect of anything approaching logic regarding the artifact, its place on the planet and everything to do with it was possibly my biggest preoccupation in last week's review, so I'm not going to go over it again here, except to add that we see no point at which the land connects neatly with the entrance used for the ship. I did think the cutouts and layers in the detail of this close shot of it hints at some explanation as to how this entrance functions, but it hasn't just landed at a perfect point that lines up exactly with the land as a doorway so neat that not even a step up or down is required to get in. This though would mean climbing would be involved, and of course Narek might be young, but old man Picard would have had the same challenge last week, and we saw him struggle with a flight of stairs in Remembrance. As Narek makes his way in then, we see sand on the ground, indicating we are meant to believe the ship landed in a perfectly lined up spot with the outside. That's Star Trek Picard for you. Even as you try to patch up its issues, it immediately introduces something to kick the hole wide open again. Narek sneaks around and overhears Elnor talking to Seven. Elnor suggests to her that maybe the XBs would be better off dead as no one likes them. I did think previously Elnor was written as guileless, but this is more like full-on autistic ignorance of the feelings of others as he floats the notion to the epitome of an ex-Borg that ex-Borg people don't belong and might be better off euthanized. Elnor's experience in universe has been relatively limited as he spent most of his life in the vicinity of the refugee shantytown with its Romulans only signs, so we could charitably suggest from a writing perspective that this is perhaps a reflection on that. It seems just as likely though in this Neo Trek that the Federation is so far gone that the everyday citizen really would gun down someone for looking a bit weird and having an eye missing, just like bad Orange Man would. Sneaky Narek stands still for a bit and then gets found by Narissa, who, despite us seeing her beamed off the ship in episode 8, must have been back again alone, because despite being almost killed by the XBs there when she had guards, it's just such a happening place to be that she couldn't stay away. Seriously, I waited the whole episode for the reason why she's actually there, and besides the plot wanting her to be around as a main character, there isn't one. It's not like she could have planned this odd confluence of circumstances, where the Borg cube ends up at Synthworld before the Romulan fleet, also crashes on the planet, and also Narek gets captured but also escapes and runs to it. To distract us from this though, she uses the most crude bit of swearing yet in all of Star Trek. The F word, but not merely as an intensifier, but as a verb. They really are pulling out all the stops for the finale. Narek's come to the cube to get some grenades to blow up the space flowers, he says, which the Simps only have 10 of anyway versus the 218 warbirds, but it all helps I suppose. If grenades can take them out though, you'd think they wouldn't be much of a difficulty for a warship's armaments, but it keeps him busy. We also hear Narek say Jacques Varsh as well, and he says it completely wrong compared to everyone else previously. I did notice as well some blatant jump cutting of Narissa. Some parts of this scene are so obviously stitched together because there's continuity lapses in facial expression and even standing position. This isn't the first time for this show. I remember a particularly jarring example when Raffi was talking to Rios in episode 8 as well. All the flashiness and advancement in reduction techniques, yet there are still basic areas where old Trek has this show beaten. We see synth technology in action, both as their transmitter to contact the Super Simps builds itself, and as Rios waves around a magic tool that looks like a cross between the Ocarina of Time and one of those Tipex mouses to fix his ship. The tool in question was given to Raffi by a synth in the previous episode to help Rios fix the ship before the Simps decided genocide was the better option, and will prove to be so ill-defined and multi-purpose in its usage that it's a literal plot device. It's a little incongruous that these Simps are so helpless and yet have this level of indistinguishable from magic technology. Bruce Maddox suspected there were people out there who sought the destruction of synthetics, which is why he sent Darge and Soji out, though that's where the logic ended with that plot element. So with that expectation, you'd think they'd have better defences as we see what their technology can do. They have the flowers too, sure, but not many, and they would seem to be technologically capable of far more. Narek finds Rios and Raffi and has also been followed by Elnor, so they have a chat about how to avoid the destruction of everything. This does raise some other questions. Why did Sutra let Narek escape? She needed him to be blamed for murdering the other synth lady, but why let him get back to the artifact? She'd have been better off killing him too, especially as his escape set in motion his planning with the others here to destroy the transmitter. And what changed his target from the space flowers, which he did know about, to the transmitter? Only Picard and Jurati were around as the transmitter to contact the Simps was discussed, and they were both still trapped in Synth Town while this new plan was concocted. And yet now Narek is speaking to Rios and Raffi, he's the one who tells them about the transmitter. It's not like Sutra would have told him. Did he lurk around the village to overhear the transmitter discussion at the end of last week and then cut a dash for the artifact? That's not the order that things were shown in. If he did somehow know about the transmitter by the start of this episode, why did he tell Narissa his target was space flowers and not mention the transmitter, which is not only the most important target for any mission in galactic history, but is also proof and validation of everything the Zhat Vash have believed and worked against? Narissa said she'd be staying on the cube to get the weapons on it active, so it could have been worth her knowing the most significant mission ever's primary target is a short sprint away. Night falls, which harms my attempts to justify the trek to and from the artifact last episode by suggesting maybe the planet doesn't rotate, and rather than sitting inside the cosy warm ship, Narek, Rios, Raffi and Elnor improbably opt to start a fire and sit around it outside. This though makes an appropriate setting as Narek tells the whole legend of mystical Romulan Armageddon, replete with a litany of ridiculous made up words. Credit has to go to Narek's actor for remembering this gibberish. A couple of scenes ago he was getting Zhat Vash wrong, but here he's reading off words that probably came from the writer's cat walking across their keyboard like it's the most natural thing in the world. Unsurprisingly, it all sounds a bit vague and, well, made up, and matches roughly the current situation. He also makes reference to the fact that this is prior history which looks set to repeat. If this is all mythology though, I can only assume that certain Romulans have been going to Aya to grab the admonition lights for a long time. It still fits, the Romulans have been spacefaring for a very long time, but it's unusual for a mythology as rather than stories being passed down, the source of it is still stood on a planet, bold as brass, waiting for more people to touch it. The plan they formulate is to get back into the synth town by pretending they've captured Narek and grenade the transmitter. They sneak the grenade inside a football, which is to say, a soccer ball, and as we have seen Rios kicking one around before now, that makes sense, though the Simps are dimwits for not questioning that he has one when they search his bag. It's not something you think of taking with you when escorting captured prisoners, and he could have shored the plan up by having a couple of spare jumpers to use for goalposts in there as well. We see this played out in the same way as in Stardust City Rag, where it cuts back and forth between them formulating it and the plan in action as they describe. As I said then as well, it's redolent of a heist movie and is a cool and stylish way of doing things. As mentioned with the grenades versus ship armaments situation earlier, one wonders whether this plan, with its potential for discovery, is preferable to getting the now fixed La Serena in the air, flying over and shooting out the transmitter. It's mentioned that the Simps have communication jamming and a transporter block, but the presence of shields that would prevent this kind of attack aren't mentioned. If they did that completely logical thing though, all the main characters wouldn't now be in Synth Town. Helpfully as well, after letting them in with a supposed escaped prisoner, the Simps just let them wander where they want, and so they make their way for the transmitter. Jurati, meanwhile, waits until Soong is out of the room and then rips the eye out of last week's murdered Synth's head. We're spared actually seeing this, which grants her more dignity than poor Icheb, though we do get the icky squelching noise, and then when we actually see the eye, Jurati's taken out a lot of head meat with it, which was pretty gross. She's done it because it seems the doors can open with a retinal scan, so she can rescue Picard, as even though he has a history of being shrewd and resourceful, they haven't got anyone guarding his room to make sure he doesn't escape. Perhaps they all went for a kickabout with Rios. Soong recovers the dead Simp's memories and sees the last thing she did, which is Sutra stabbing her in the eye, so he makes a face turn to join the team that doesn't want everyone like him dead for not having been constructed in a lab, and so becomes the only person to find Raffi, Rios, Elnor and Narek at the back of the transmitter and offers to help. From now on, Soong is treated like a good guy, but let's not forget it's the single fact that Sutra killed her fellow synth rather than Narek that's changed his mind on killing trillions of people. He also has a close range device which shuts Sutra down and she collapses. Whether she's permanently dead, we don't know. He doesn't use this on Soji though, even though Soji is at the controls building the transmitter and also blocking the way for the attempt with the grenade. The only reason he wouldn't do so is that she's a main character and the writers don't want to just shut her down out of nowhere when they have stupider plans for her. Jurati and Picard escape and immediately make it back to La Serena, somehow bypassing the guards who made sneaking in an issue for the others. Now, I thought initially they were talking about how to stop the Uber Simps, as Jurati calls them, leading me to believe either Picard's brain trouble is manifesting again or the writers had caught it from him as well, because he seemed to suggest the way to stop the Simps intent on galactic oblivion will be for him to give a speech at them, and hey, if that fails he can throw some tea Grey hot in their faces. But no, he's actually talking about stopping the planet Simps who are building the beacon. This is the issue with having two groups who are both Simps without their own distinguishing names. I've mostly referred to the other ones as Super Simps to distinguish them because it's accurate and also slightly stupid as the show deserves. It wouldn't have taken much for either group to have been given a proper name, but considering the litany of dreadful sci-fi names in this show before now, perhaps they didn't want to take the risk. Picard thinks the planet Simps just need a good example to follow and they'll see the folly of their scheme. His plan will actually be on even easier mode because despite being the one with the most divided loyalties and potential for turning, the synth in charge of finishing and activating the transmitter is Soji. Soji, who he dedicated himself to saving from the Zhat Vash and who is repaying that kindness by actively doing just what the Zhat Vash feared. Picard's talking about setting the example of someone who wouldn't cause an interstellar genocide, but if his actions haven't convinced Soji these past 10 weeks, then you would think there's not much left now that would do it. He launches the ship into the air immediately, demonstrating there's no issue with it, and Rios and Co could easily have flown it to the transmitter and shot it to pieces in a matter of seconds, rather than their actual plan, which is the equivalent of walking in with a ladder and pretending they're the window cleaner. Picard flies the ship from Rios' seat and doesn't find it easy. Sadly for the integrity of the story's logic, he doesn't just use the multiple Rios holograms specifically created for the job, but on the upside it means we don't have to endure their stupid accents and hijinks. Maybe they're the only thing on the ship that didn't get fixed while everything else did for some reason. I can't think why else they wouldn't be used in favour of an old man who barely knows what he's doing and whose brain is giving him jip. The real reason is they want this to be Picard's big moment, and that would be rather undermined in multiple ways by the holograms, but if you have to sacrifice logic to hit the emotional and dramatic beats you want, you should rejig the whole scenario. Predictably, the plan to destroy the transmitter with the grenade fails. This marks the last point we see Narek as he's dragged off by a couple of Simps to an unknown fate. I say predictably because it's such a common trope. An entirely rational plan is foiled to create drama while a stupid one of universe-bending proportions succeeds later on. The Doctor Who revival since 2005 stands out to me for doing this a lot in its finales, but if you want a Star Trek example, the Deep Space Nine episode Sacrifice of Angels is the most notable and controversial one. The plan on the Dominion-occupied station by the Resistance to shut down the station's weapons so they can't wipe out the minefield blocking the wormhole through which is the Jem'Hadar fleet is accomplished too late, but Sisko flies into the wormhole on the Defiant and convinces the wormhole aliens to vanish the Jem'Hadar ships. The logical plan is built up and fails for drama's sake, while the Deus Ex Machina plot device succeeds. Of course, in this episode of Picard we also have the additional clue that we were less than halfway into the episode, which ameliorates the trope somewhat. On the cube, Seven finds Narissa messing with the controls. It looks like she was targeting La Sirena with its weapons, so it's lucky Seven got there just when she did, as she has a habit of doing. Even though she's disarmed, Narissa still decides to provoke Seven, and so after a fight, she's killed by being kicked down one of those big drops with no handrails. I get it's karmic for Hugh and everything, but it was still very disappointing. It wasn't built up, it wasn't over anything of deep plot relevance, and only tacked on the targeting of La Sirena. It really just amounts to Seven finds Narissa, they fight, Narissa dies. As mentioned before, why Narissa's even on the artifact in the first place isn't explained, but had she stayed beamed away after the end of episode 8, she couldn't be here now to get kicked off the side. So she was put here for no reason other than they wanted to kill her off, and it sucked anyway. Narissa was getting very close to gaining a whole third dimension as a character in the past couple of episodes, aided here as well when she hugged Narek upon finding him in the cube, which was completely unexpected, and the fact she and Narek here find themselves on the good side. The artifact's actually disconnected from the plot of the episode really. They brought it along and crashed it here so all the characters could be on the one planet, but Seven doesn't know what's actually going on. When Picard met her and Elnor in the last episode, the approaching threat was going to be the Romulans. Since then it's proven to be the Simps and the Transmitter. Since La Sirena's operational and some systems are up and running in the artifact, you'd think they'd have radioed Seven with the latest. At the very least, they could have sent Elnor back with the news so it might play some kind of role at the conclusion. But no, there's no contribution from the cube or the XBs whatsoever in this episode. The Romulan fleet arrives and so the space flowers are sent up. It's another one on the nitpicky side, I know, but the flowers are launched from the surface and get to space in no time at all. They don't exactly seem to move swiftly either. By comparison, it takes the space shuttle 8 minutes to leave Earth's atmosphere, and that has 2 rocket boosters attached. Here, as soon as the Romulan fleet arrives, Commodore O gives the order to bombard the planet. The whole planet too, incidentally, so either she doesn't know Narissa's down there or just doesn't care. The next cut to space and the flowers are up there to do battle with the planet as yet unbombarded. Well, we know we're in for a Deus Ex Machina or two, as the heroes have few resources up against overwhelming odds, and the synth gizmo tool that fixed the ship provides the first. With it, Jurati projects numerous images of La Sirena so the Romulans think there are loads and engage them. It's a magic device that does whatever the user wants of it. It fixes Rios' ship instantly, it projects an entire fake fleet coming in from warp. Its mechanisms and limitations are undefined and it does whatever the user thinks. Now if they have hand-sized tools that can do such outlandish things, it's a wonder the Sims are worried about the Romulans at all. Mercifully, this lunacy doesn't last too long, as while the Romulan fleet shoots at the fake images, it also wings the real La Sirena and sends it spinning. After this, despite Picard's attempt to put Soji off by messaging her to say, "Look, I'm sacrificing myself," the beacon to contact the Super Simps activates. When the ship gets clipped and spins out of control, Soji gasps no, because she can't stand the idea of poor Picard getting hurt, as though he'd be spared the death awaiting all organics that she's working to bring about. Sometimes I'll watch the title sequence of Star Trek Picard rather than skip it, because it is very artistic and cool. And what's more, after 10 weeks the theme tune has really caught in my mind. It compares favourably with the other Star Trek shows, though of course Faith of the Heart is still the best one. I mention that because I watched it this week and so was slightly spoiled by it listing Jonathan Frakes as appearing. I predicted he'd be back in the last episode to help save the day, and I was right. Of course, I predicted the same about 7 of 9, and she came back a lot sooner, though it did still qualify as saving the day then as well. It's the way with these types of things that someone comes back to help at the end. So, here's Deus Ex Riker then, here just in time with the Federation fleet. I have to say, after waiting for 9 episodes to see a Starfleet ship, it's a big disappointment. Though on inspection, not all these ships are the same, they are samey and very bland designs, more like something that belongs in the background of a video game cutscene than something in the lineage of Star Trek's iconic designs. There's not much sense of the scale of the ships like in the Next Generation era either. It could just as well be a fleet of TIE fighters as a fleet of starships. This might be where the limitations for CGI on a TV show budget come in, but battles in Deep Space Nine still conveyed scale, and that ended over 20 years ago. Let's be very clear about what's going on here though. The portal is now open and slowly widening. The Romulans were in position to destroy it just before Starfleet arrived, and now Riker is actively preventing O and the Romulans from saving all life in the galaxy. The music and his triumphant dialogue all indicate we are meant to see this as a heroic moment rather than what it actually logically is. Riker thinking he's saving the day and by doing so actually dooming all life in the galaxy. This should be a moment of stomach-churning despair, but this whole situation by this point is set up such that the presentation is contrary to the plot. O is the big villain and yet she's the only one placed to prevent the organic genocide. Riker's the hero and yet he's stopping her from literally saving the galaxy, presumably unwittingly. This should be a moment of unsettling tragedy, but the good guys must be good, the villains must be bad, and however rational O's plan is based on everything happening right now, we're meant to be relieved in this moment that she's been thwarted. I think this is why she was given the line commanding the bombardment of the entire planet rather than just striking at the transmitter. We're meant to still believe she's the baddie, despite the facts of the situation. Picard gets headachy, but he takes a hypo-spray shot and gets Soji on an open channel so everyone can watch. He makes the argument that I pointed out he should have in the last episode, that the Federation were actively trying to protect the Simps and so obviously aren't the same as the Romulans who want to destroy them. But I suppose with a whole fleet in the sky holding the Romulans off, it becomes more tangibly the case, though he should still have tried to make it last time. We see the Super Simps just start to come up to the hole the beacon opened up, even though I thought it was transmitting a message calling for help rather than generating a portal, because that's what's been implied the whole time by calling it a transmitter. They look like variations on the machines out of the Matrix films, but in the form of metal snaky things, perhaps like giant cybermats from classic Doctor Who. Soji shuts down the beacon and it closes before any get through. To avoid battling the Federation, and perhaps because the beacon shutting down means the danger they feared Simps pose is over, even though the galaxy was moments away from the death of all organic life, the Romulan fleet changed their mind, and a mere 6 minutes after arriving, Riker says goodbye and they all buzz off again. A victory for diplomacy and speechifying over action and conflagration then, which is ostensibly appropriate for Jean-Luc Picard. After this, he collapses to the floor. Soji beams him and Jurati down to the planet, and as the music swells, he dies with everyone else around him. It's not what I would have chosen for him. If he was going to die in the arms of a doctor, it should be Crusher and not Jurati. But then, not being what I'd have chosen for Picard goes for this whole show. I still can't deny it hits the emotional beats. At this point there was still a quarter of the episode left, so I was wondering what could happen next. Dr. Soong's mind transfer thing hadn't yet had a payoff. Was Picard's consciousness going to be the recipient of that and render this whole thing a fake out? Well, next we get some of the characters talking and being mopey. Seven and Rios say not much in particular while drinking out of a vase, though Seven does talk about how she really must stop killing people. Now I was a bit of a defender of Stardust City Rag, compared with others I'd generally be on the same side as when it comes to this show, seeing in it a depth implied as to how Seven and Picard view justice differently according to their experience. Others saw her character just as having been transformed into someone who can't help murdering people to sort things out. Well, more for me for reading into it something that suggests they did something more than just turn a classic character into an angsty murderess for the sake of it, because that's exactly the message they're putting across here. Great job, guys. I expect in Season 2 we'll get Dr. Bashir returning as a meth dealer, while Rom and Lita have become the 24th century's Fred and Rose West. Rather than bog things down with any more emo pretension, Raffi and Elnor just cry. And Picard and Data have a conversation in a simulated realm. It's not just that they realised there's not enough of an emotional hit with dying Picard only being with people he's known in this show, nor is it merely a dream, the last moments of Picard's dying mind making peace with a simulacrum of Data, though I think I would have preferred that to be true. You can make the case that Picard has been motivated in this show by his unresolved relationship with Data. He was having dreams about him in remembrance, and because he didn't get to say goodbye as Data died for him, it makes sense that that lack of closure would play on his mind through the years and give him those dreams. That feeling of unfinished business and the chance to make recompense through the proxy of Data's kin could be what really motivated Picard to aid Soji. Dahj was killed and Picard could have felt he'd failed Data in that, but it made him absolutely committed to doing what he could for her remaining twin and Data's other daughter. This conversation could be Picard's fading subconscious making peace with itself by giving him one last dream of Data where their relationship is resolved and Picard feels he has repaid Data for his sacrifice through saving his offspring. And for all the other nonsense this show has thrown at us, I think that would feel right. But no, it's not that. This is genuinely Data, or rather that positronic neuron of his which still exists in Soong's lab, and thanks to the fractal nonsense from all the way back in episode 1, contains his full being. The conversation is good though, a highlight for the whole show even without my above interpretation being the case. It's weird too, in a good way, as distinct from Data's face, which is weird in a bad way, but as before they've done the best they can with that. They discuss Data's death in Nemesis, Picard's relationship with Data, and also implicitly reveal that it was B4 that Maddox got Data's neuron from to create the other simps. And Data asks a favour of Picard, that he let him die. Data echoes what Picard said to Soren in Generations, that it's our mortality that defines us, as well as fulfilling a desire he revealed in the Next Generation story Time's Arrow to live a finite mortal life. Even though this show is of course written by people whose take on Star Trek is quite different from my own, there is verisimilitude in the discussion, and its fidelity to old Trek made it moving. The one big irritation was that Data was wearing a Next Generation movie era uniform, and yet he has a visible zip pull at the top of his undershirt. The absence of visible zips and joins and the rest was always a very intentional part of Star Trek before, and almost as an insult to that, they put one obviously in this scene. One of the most noticeable things visually about Star Trek Picard is its sharp deviation from the sartorial style of previous Star Trek by essentially having people dressed in present day clothing, but there was no reason to have a visible zip on an old uniform for any other reason than to have a dig at the past. As Data gestured to Picard to leave through a white doorway though, it didn't mean he was about to die or run into Q or even walk onto the beach by the artifact. Instead he wakes up and Soong indeed has done some mind transfer jiggery-pokery to save his life. He's still ancient old Patrick Stewart though, and not a robot or Tom Hardy or someone else. They magicked up a Picard body but also kept him very elderly. Whether he still has a mechanical heart we don't know, but the brain trouble's gone. You only have my word for it that I guess they'd do something like this when Picard died and there was time left on the clock, but it's not like they'd have introduced Soong's project in the previous episode and not used it somehow. Magicking up clone bodies out of nowhere is a massive thing to introduce on the fly. I referred to these flesh and blood simps as effectively 3D printed humans last time, and that's pretty much what this has to be. Of course, now everyone will want one. Picard says to Soong that his gain is Soong's loss, which implies that this was the one and only memory transfer body that we saw briefly in the previous episode, and so he's the lucky one-time recipient of one. Though how they quickly transformed a ready-to-go body into 94-year-old Picard is actually probably the daftest part of this already very daft scenario. So they went for the emotional hit of killing Picard but then didn't stick with it. That's cheap and lame. The best I can say is at least they didn't draw it out to the extent of giving him a funeral and the rest and keeping us believing he was gone for 20 minutes. And he did have the scene with Data to sort of give it narrative purpose, and that also served to bookend the series with the Data dreams in remembrance. Still, I'm not impressed by this. We're not given time to be too bothered by it though, as Picard fulfills his promise to Data by letting him, or rather that remnant positronic neuron of his, die. This is done by pulling some USB sticks out of a machine, presumably without right clicking and making sure it's safe to remove them first. Then they all get on the ship and fly off. Also, Seven and Raffi hold hands a little, so I guess they're lesbians now. I know who I think's the lucky one in that pairing, but it's poor Chakotay I feel sorry for. Also, Jurati's there, so I guess it didn't matter that she killed Maddox now. And everyone's fine with Soji being around, even though she was moments away from killing trillions of people. There are some ostensibly praiseworthy things about ET in Arcadia Ego Part 2. At the risk of sounding like a Last Jedi defender, it subverted the expectation of a massive battle or destruction or anything, as the super simps only briefly appear and the Romulans disengage after a standoff. Picard wins the day through diplomacy. That diplomacy amounts to talking Soji out of committing galactic biocide through his example of getting the ship he's in shot by the Romulans, but the principle at least seems like it's in line with old Picard, considering he initially saved her from the Romulans and took her under his wing after that though. It shouldn't have taken much more to demonstrate that perhaps not every organic person deserves to be wiped out. Seeing Soji crying over briefly dead Picard and then being all pally with everyone as though nothing happened was dreadful. Just because she had a change of heart at the very last moment doesn't undo that she went along with it for all that time. As for Picard's death, it might have been on the cards for a while, if not since all the way back in All Good Things, and it was effective briefly, but to do that and immediately negate it is unforgivable. Now the reasoning of course is that the show might be named for Picard, but Data has been the shadow hanging over it, and this gives them both closure. Having dead Picard's consciousness meet Data's positronic neuron in Soong's wacky lab does it, but to get there and back it's required the ability to magic up another body to plant Picard's consciousness back into, and weirdly one that's as old and frail. Picard died in just the right place with just the right people then. I hope Soong's going to go into mass production with this, because when word gets out that this can be done, demand will be sky high. I worried last week that the story wouldn't tie up here and we'd have to wait for answers and a conclusion, but considering what we got, that would have been preferable, because essentially the story, after all these attempts at mystery and build up and intrigue and connecting the dots, is that nothing happened. The super synth portal is opened, then closed again, the Romulans don't attack because the Federation arrives. The end. It's all been building up to a great big nothing. Soji made a choice not to become the destroyer or whatever. Well, after trying to connect all these pieces along the way, for there to be no revelation or conclusion or solution feels like I've been cheated all this time. They had a bunch of ideas but no way of dealing with them, so they just made them go away and hoped another data scene would be enough. The foremost issue with the overarching plot is there's no big twist or revelation at the end. No one triumphs over anyone else. Things that were going to happen just stop. It's irritatingly unsatisfying, particularly when it's been slowly built up over 10 often tedious episodes. You expect something a bit deeper than, and then nothing happened. This is why I say it's doing the unexpected is only ostensibly praiseworthy, because it's not that they did something different and unexpected compared with the expectation of action and space battles, rather it's that they just didn't do anything at all in its place. Rather than option A, big action stuff, or option B, something else that's unexpected, they went for option C, which is not doing A but not really doing anything substantially B either. Picard's death might be a lame fake out, but this was a lame fake out for a whole 10 episodes of television. That desire for something deeper is why there was so much fan speculation as to what would tie in and where. This is, after all, one of the longest running and by now most detailed universes in all of fiction, so for things of deep history and enormous consequences to be promised raise the question of how it would fit in with what's established. They dodged this by making the super simps from another galaxy, so they're not related to the Borg, V'ger or anything else, even though they also moved 8 stars in the Milky Way and left their neon frame around for all people to find. I guess Soji really did know about the Borg transwarp network and the range of the Queen Soul transporter from hanging out on the artifact then. They weren't clues at all. The show's big issue, I think, is a repetition of the Star Trek Insurrection problem, and no, I don't mean ruining the thing by allowing Patrick Stewart to have some creative control, but rather that the bad guys are kind of in the right. Considering the transmitter actually just slowly opens a wormhole rather than gets a message out to the super simps, as being called a transmitter would imply. Had the Romulans bombarded the planet when they got there, then they really would have sorted the issue out, as it would have shut off. Riker's showing up and stopping them could have doomed the galaxy had Soji not grown a conscience over dying Picard, who would have been one of the first to die anyway before the trillions of others had she not changed her mind. The Zhat Vash were pretty much the good guys by the end, frankly. I get it, the whole thing is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They go after Simps because of the destruction Simps would inevitably bring, and the Simps bring that destruction in self-defense because of the Zhat Vash. Considering the situation specifics and the stakes though, you could sign me up for the Romulan Navy at that point. Picard and Jurati's attempts to stop them could recklessly have doomed the whole galaxy, all because an old man with a migraine was sure he could talk Soji down at the final moment. The resolution by diplomacy over violence might seem like a very Picard move, but would Next Generation Picard have taken such a huge risk? The point about why he has a reputation for competence isn't just his ability to give a speech and speak carefully, but because he would firmly take the necessary and difficult command decisions where required. Talking Soji into changing her mind might seem like a nod to Picard of old and his way with words, but counterintuitively it's actually the triumph of emotion over rationality. Keep Soji on the phone to try to get her to change her mind, sure, but don't get in the way of the Romulans when their actions could be the last hope for saving the whole galaxy. Lastly, we're left with that question of the super simps. The specific phrasing in the previous episode was that the beacon summons them, which suggests they receive the message and make their own way to the location, and this was seemingly affirmed here as Sutra says they begin transmitting, and when the signal is received a portal opens. This would obviously imply that the portal is generated by the super simps, particularly as this makes the most sense, but it's not, otherwise shutting down the beacon would have made no difference to the super simps coming. So it isn't a simple transmitter to merely contact the super simps, it's actually a wormhole portal generator for them to enter through as well. This is a stupendous bit of tech to knock up in a short space of time, even if they have been given the instructions in the vision, and I would think would also require a power source bigger than this seaside retirement village has to hand. As the intention is that persecuted simps can use it to reach the super simps in their hour of need as well, having something so complicated and resource heavy when they only need to get a message over with their location is stupid. What's more, it could actually revolutionise travel in the Star Trek universe, so long as they can figure out how to make the other side somewhere that doesn't have giant metal murder tentacles. We'll see if it ever comes up again then, though I doubt it. This conceptual shift from being a transmitter to a portal device meant they could shut it off before the super simps got through, but what's to stop them coming anyway? If they receive the call, then it must of course be from their synth brethren, and that it shut off early would most likely appear as though the persecuting organics got to them. From what little we know of them, it sounds more likely that the super simps would plot their own course for the Milky Way, or even generate their own portal after that to come and help, rather than shrug and say, I guess they didn't need us after all, false alarm guys, considering how they were obviously champing at the bit to get through as the portal slowly opened. There's no lack of urgency from their perspective. It's not like they have any technical restrictions, besides being a multi-galactic power who must therefore be able to get between galaxies with relative ease. It's their instructions that built the portal device anyway, so they can easily just show up through their own portal. The only reason they wouldn't is that despite receiving the transmission and the beacon opening up the portal for them, the signal they receive doesn't actually tell them where it's coming from, and that would be too stupid for words. That's never stopped this show though. It could be that they're on a bit of a delay though, and the next series will involve an incursion by them into this galaxy, in which case the promise of this finale will just be postponed. As they've been presented as an unstoppable force though, it's more likely I reckon that we'll just never see them again. Thank you for listening. Do please like and share if you've enjoyed it, and do leave me any comments with your own thoughts. If you feel I deserve it, I would appreciate if you'd subscribe. The full playlist with reviews and analyses of all episodes in the series is in the description if you fancy checking those out as well. They contain lots of little Star Trek history detours and observations too. After all these years, that built up knowledge of Star Trek has come in useful. I only wish it was in regards to something better than Picard Series 1 turned out to be. I'm still quite new at this, and it's been a big commitment to get these made every week, particularly these later ones which have been quite long. This video in particular is almost as long as my whole Rise of Skywalker review. This isn't the end though, I have another video or two planned about this show, particularly a review of Star Trek Picard Series 1 as a whole, so if you're willing to hear from me again, subscribe away. Also, if you've enjoyed my take on this and have a request for anything else, leave a comment. With the Rise of Skywalker and Picard out of the way, and now the next Bond film postponed until the post-Plague era, I'm not sure there's anything new now for me to cover for a while, but I'm open to any suggestions, past or present. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.